let's go to the Twitter files. Now, today, in the weaponization of the federal government against conservatives, dog and pony show that Jim Jordan put up, this guy right here is one of the other writers who wrote with Matt Taibbi. And there's a lot in this. This was a 3-hour thing. And I don't, by the way, have any way to, deal with any of this stuff. But this is this guy's opening statement. We've heard Taibbi shit before, and I'll cover it next. But this is, I want to show you guys, if I may, this dude's hold on, I want to make sure this isn't too loud if it's up this high. This is his opening statement. He wrote, I want to say, 3 of the Twitter files I think that I've seen. And I've seen all of them, but the distinction at the point is without a difference, because ultimately these two guys are just different Brita filters for the same fucking tap water.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting my testimony.
No, the Republicans invited your testimony and are directing it as well, because they released the Twitter files from today that I dunked on. If you haven't seen my dunking on that on Twitter, go check it out. Go check it out. And they put it out, basically had it released right as they were sitting down. The Republicans had seen what was released today, and the Democrats didn't have access to it until the public did. Now, obviously, the Democrats are pushing back to some degree on the fact that this stuff was given to the Republicans ahead of time and then released on the web, so that any Democrats who were on the panel might go, oh, they fucking trying to wreck my argument by posting some sort of contradictory piece of evidence I'm not aware of in this situation. Democrats, you have nothing to worry about. The blather from today was the same blather we've heard all along. As a matter of fact, it undercut Matt Taibbi's testimony. It was the dumbest timing he could have possibly done, with the exception of like the night before. Because if he'd have done that, and maybe that was the case, maybe, Musk asked him to do it the night before because, right before the hearing, but then he realized, now the Democrats will be able to use this to make me look like a dickhead.
In his 1961 farewell address, President Dwight Eisenhower warned,
oh Lord,
of, quote, the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex.
And had he only warned us of the NGO information complex.
Eisenhower feared that the size and power of the complex or cluster of government contractors in the Defense Department would, quote, endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
But they ain't got shit on Elon Musk buying Twitter.
How did he mean that? Through, quote, domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money. He feared public policy would become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Cool story, bro. And are you just stealing valor from another era in America?
Eisenhower's fears were well-founded. Today, American taxpayers are unwittingly financing the growth and power of a censorship industrial complex.
Jesus Christ. Okay, first of all, there is no such thing as a censorship industrial complex. And if you think there is, more than likely, you're just a disgruntled child pornographer who thinks your free speech rights have been violated.
Run by America's scientific and technological elite, which endangers our liberties and democracy.
How?
I'm grateful for this opportunity to offer this testimony and sound the alarm over the shocking and disturbing emergence of state-sponsored censorship in the United States of America.
Shazam! That's a big statement. It's bullshit. And by the way, I got news for you. We have state-sponsored censorship in the United States. Oh, no. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, true. We do. We have police officers that will enforce a law against you yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, or even a live theater, or even, in a concert if it's not too loud and everybody can actually hear you, and you're not at an AC/DC concert where you're supposed to yell fire. The taxpayer funds a certain amount of censorship, like like child pornography. Yeah. Yeah, we don't have an absolute freedom of speech in this country. There are limits, and a lot of times it takes cops or fibbies to stop it.
The Twitter files, state attorneys general lawsuits, and investigative reporters have revealed a large and growing network of government agencies, academic institutions, and non-governmental organizations that are actively censoring American citizens.
Okay. An NGO cannot censor you. A university cannot censor you. And in all of the cases they cite, the government did not censor people. Not lawful speech, anyways.
Often without their knowledge on a range of issues.
Can you imagine losing your free speech and not knowing it? My mouth just stopped working.
I do not know how much of the censorship is coordinated beyond what we have been able to document, and I will.
I do. He's literally there as an expert witness. He's literally there because of the documents he's been given access to. This has been going on for fucking months. He is a witness at a committee that is talking about the weaponization of the federal government. And what was that shit again?
I do not know how much of the censorship is coordinated beyond what we have been able to document, and I will not speculate.
All of his quote-unquote censorship to date has been speculation. Because everything they cite, half the time Twitter says, yeah, we agree with that, and half the time Twitter says no. There is no force and coercion if you have a choice, and it is up to you. The only situation that I've seen where there was a threat of the force of government on any social media platform for what they were doing, that they didn't agree to, human trafficking, fentanyl sales on Snapchat, all that kind of stuff, the kind of stuff that they agree with the federal government and the general public, maybe a couple of people there are on the fence, Rand Paul and whatnot. But in that general group, they all kind of, they're not coordinating. They just all agree it's probably not a good idea that people can sell fentanyl to children on Snapchat, that kind of stuff. That's not censorship. Beyond that, there's only one case that I know of that they have alleged that brought behind it the force of the federal government as a threat. And that was Donald Trump trying to get Twitter to take down Chrissy Teigen's insult of him.
Recognize that the law allows Facebook, Twitter, and other private companies to moderate content on their platforms. And I support the right of governments to communicate with the public, including to dispute inaccurate information.
I just don't agree with them doing it behind the scenes. I think the people should be able to hear the disinfo and the misinfo heavily and fully without them interacting and basically be behind the 8 ball all the time. Never warn anybody that disinfo and misinfo is coming.
But government officials have been caught repeatedly pushing social media platforms to censor disfavored users and content.
Disfavored. Why would they be disfavored? Maybe because they posted non-consensual nudes of people?
Often these acts of censorship threaten the legal protection social media companies need to exist, Section 230. If government officials are directing or facilitating such censorship, notes one law professor, it raises serious First Amendment questions. It is axiomatic that the government cannot do indirectly what it is prohibited from doing directly.
Okay, first of all, there is no absolute prohibition on the U.S. government disenfranchising certain kinds of speech. And again, yelling fire in a crowded theater and child porn, that's the easiest case, or not being a doctor, calling yourself a doctor and selling a pill you make in your basement. That advertisement is in and of itself a crime. It's fraud. Fraud is not protected speech in this situation. So the idea somehow that this dickhead thinks that general idea doesn't exist. He's run aground there anyways. But at what point does I'd be curious to see what his line is.
Moreover, we know that the U.S. government has funded organizations that pressure advertisers to boycott news media organizations and
They have funded organizations that would boycott news media organizations. You mean like women's rights groups or racial preference groups or civil rights groups or LGBTQ groups or whatever? And if those people basically think about this thought for a second. Listen to this again. Listen to his criticism right here. Listen to this.
Has funded organizations that pressure advertisers to boycott news media organizations. We know that the U.S. government has funded organizations that pressure advertisers to boycott news media organizations and social media platforms that refuse to censor and or spread disinformation, including alleged conspiracy theories.
Okay, so the idea is that if the United States in any way gives grants or support to civil rights groups, for example, and those civil rights groups choose to boycott a social media website because they give the Klan a page or they advocate for against gay marriage, and so those groups say we're taking our money elsewhere. It is his assertion, it would seem, that they would lose their government funding if they act if they raise their voice in opposition to the speech that they see in a private venue. It doesn't stop anybody else, right? And the private venue would have the right to go, no, we don't do that kind of thing. Thank you for your business. Again, this is not censorship. It's not even fucking close. But what he's advocating for is that if AIDS Project Los Angeles or GLAAD or any of these groups get any kind of funding for research into how to lower suicide rates among teens or put money towards the Trevor Project or what have you, and then at some point, Elon Musk or one of his buddies just gets into a shitstorm, being completely anti-gay and gross and all that kind of stuff, and starts running nothing but Chick-fil-A ads, and GLAAD says, we as GLAAD believe you shouldn't use that service. What he's saying is they should no longer get government funding if they respond with their own free speech and their freedom of association to someone else's speech in a private enterprise.
The Stanford Internet Observatory, the University of Washington, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research.
The University of Washington. Okay. Whew. So if the U.S. government in any form gives money to the University of Washington, and the University of Washington at some point participates in a boycott, especially around speech, or denies like a speaker on their campus or something like that, like Nick Fuentes. If they tell Nick Fuentes he can't speak on campus, then they lose, the University of Washington should lose all their federal funding, even if it's just for their science department. You know what? Because he either means that or he wants you to believe, and whoever's listening, and he knows this, he wants you to believe that the government gave that money to the University of Washington specifically for a control point to get them to boycott those, that they only get this money if we can tell them who the boycott goes to, which is the man wins the golden turd idiocy trophy. But you can't, you got to give him points for trying, I suppose.
Lab and Graphica have all inadequately disclosed ties to the Department of Defense, the CIA, and other intelligence agencies.
They've disclosed their ties, but inadequately. So again, if the NIH gives University of Washington funds and the law and crime, part of campus where they do, people can get their criminology degrees or whatever, coordinates with law enforcement, FBI, CIA, they recruit out of there, any of that shit. So they send their people to give speeches and they talk back and forth, or they have people go up and whatever, train on the farm if they're thinking about a career in intelligence or any of that shit. If they disclose it, but inadequately disclose it, according to him, then that means the money the NIH gave to their biology department was meant to control speech. This is so fucking stupid.
They work with multiple U.S. government agencies to institutionalize censorship research and advocacy within
institutionalized censorship research. I love sentences that sound like you're saying something, but you actually don't.
dozens of other universities and think tanks. It is important.
Yeah, like everybody's reading, like they're reading his opening statement. They're going, "What the fuck?"
Important to understand how these groups function. They are not publicly engaging with their opponents in an open exchange of ideas. They aren't asking for a national.
Oh, by the way, for the record, he and Matt Taibbi and every Republican on this, Matt earlier in the Twitter files he released, defended Yevgeny Prigozhin's freedom of speech rights on Twitter. By the way, I don't know what the fuck that is. So, according to Matt Taibbi, if you're on Twitter, you get to violate the terms of service based on whatever the rules are in your country. If it's okay to gay bash in Russia, you can do it on Twitter because Twitter can only have rules in line with the value systems of the country you're using it from. I don't know what the fuck where that logic comes from. But, well, shit, where was I? Because we
not publicly engaging with their opponents in an open.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You can't publicly engage in a fair debate with a fucking bot farm.
Open exchange of ideas. They aren't asking for a national debate over the limits of the First Amendment.
They aren't asking for a national debate on the limits of the First Amendment because we all largely agree on it. You can't pretend to have medical knowledge you don't have. You can't commit fraud, libel, slander, varying laws around that shit and what the standard is, but it's verboten when it's proven. You also can't, express yourself and your sexuality by being nude in public, for example. Sorry, guys.
Rather, they are creating blacklists of disfavored people and then
Disfavored.
pressuring, cajoling, and demanding that social media platforms censor, de-amplify, and even ban the people on those lists.
Which sometimes they would do because they agreed that it violated their terms of service. And sometimes they wouldn't do. And sometimes they do it on their own, even when the government didn't ask them to, because they had their own standards and they were higher than the government's in one particular area, because the government knew it couldn't have a standard in that area because of the constitutional limits that don't apply to private entities. But the best part is Johnson over here taking notes so he can appear smart later. It's pretty bad. And then Matt Gaetz, he already knows what he's going to say, so he's just kind of pretending to listen.
The censorship industrial complex combines
doesn't exist.
Established methods of psychological manipulation, some developed
it's a psyop
by the U.S. military during the global war on terror.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Not allowing child sex trafficking on Twitter is a defense weapon. DARPA came up with it.
With highly sophisticated tools from computer science, including artificial intelligence, the complex.
All right, fuck off. They use algorithms because there's too many goddamn tweets to deal with. Artificial intelligence. Simmer the fuck down. This stuff predates ChatGPT, dum-dum. It's a scanning software. It scrapes words. And then a human has to review it. And arguably, there's definitely artificial intelligence at Twitter, largely the people running it right now.
Complex's leaders are driven by the fear that the internet and social media platforms empower populist, alternative, and fringe personalities and views which they regard as destabilizing.
Yeah, but enough about ISIS.
Federal government officials...
But by the way, if this dude had any chutzpah at all, he would just insist on entering ISIS beheading videos into the public record.
Agencies and contractors have gone from fighting ISIS recruiters and Russian bots to censoring and deplatforming ordinary Americans and disfavored public figures.
Sorry, okay, hang on. Percentage-wise, as far as people who believe the full-on QAnon shit, or the difference between a person, an ordinary American, who might have concerns about a vaccine, for example, versus those who insist that it's got microchips in it and that Bill Gates is trying to track us all, or it's part of a big depopulation scheme. Those are two people that are vaccine hesitant, but there's a fucking level. And again, it goes back to this whole thing about like the Jan Sixers. They're not in trouble for what they thought. They're fucking what they did. And there's a difference between being like, I'm a bit worried about this, and I know exactly what this does. It's part of a giant scheme by the lizard people. And this, he wants to make no distinction and go, both those people, ordinary Americans. They're not. They're extraordinary. They're extraordinarily stupid.
Importantly, the bar for bringing in military...
By the way, extraordinarily stupid is not a reason to not be able to post on Twitter, except when you're in the business of asserting your credentials or quite frankly, posting false information on purpose to manipulate people. In this case, in some of the cases they cite later, or at least they did today in the Twitter files they released, tricking people into voting on the wrong day, or saying, voting stops at a certain time when it doesn't, or that your precinct may have changed and that kind of stuff, trying to throw a material monkey wrench in the information that people get to get on with their lives.
Government monitoring and speech countering techniques has moved from, quote, countering terrorism to, quote, countering extremism to countering simple misinformation, otherwise known as being wrong on the internet.
No, there's that again. This is I guess his whole gig is conflation. That guy in the back isn't buying it. Misinformation is not being wrong on the internet. They can share characteristics, but if you're misinforming people, it's because you believe that stuff and you're being wrong actively. You're part of it. And when you're told, people who are misinformed, we've all been misinformed in the past, and then you find something out and you're no longer misinformed. But if you keep saying, when you've heard, that you're wrong and you've been confronted with the evidence, you're no longer doing misinformation. You're now doing disinformation because you know better.
The government no longer needs a predicate of calling...
I love how nobody wants to sit next to Harriet Hagman.
...you a terrorist or an extremist to deploy government resources to counter your political activity. The only predicate it needs is simply the assertion that the opinion you expressed on social media is wrong.
No, it's not about opinions. It's the assertion of facts that you do not have or that are false themselves, not your opinion. Because an opinion is, in my opinion, somebody has an opinion that we don't know enough about vaccines to take them, so I'm scared of taking them because, in my opinion, that there couldn't be enough testing for that kind of idea. Whereas if you say Bill Gates is putting microchips in these things to track us, that's not an opinion. That's an assertion of bullshit. It's not an opinion. Nobody even states it's an opinion. If you ask those fucking QAnon people if that's their opinion, and they'll go, no, it's a fact. Right.
These efforts extend to influencing and even directing conventional news media organizations. Since 1971, when the Washington Post and New York Times elected to publish classified Pentagon papers about the war in Vietnam, journalists have understood that we have a professional obligation to report on leaked documents whose contents are in the public interest.
Right. But in the context of that you have all the documents and that they paint a full picture. This is not... Hold on a second. This isn't leaked documents. Nothing about this qualifies as the fucking Pentagon papers. There is no alignment. Fuck you. You do not get to steal Daniel Ellsberg's fucking valor by laying yourself on the same line as that dude, because this asshole is being spoon-fed bits of information from Twitter by the new owner who bought it. He didn't earn it or get elected. The people didn't choose him for that station. Like Twitter's a fucking country that he managed to sneak in through a window in the capital of Twitter and sneak out with a fucking microfilm. The nerve of this dude.
And yet in 2020, the Aspen Institute and Stanford Cyber Policy Center urged journalists to, quote, break the Pentagon Papers principle and not cover leaked information to prevent the spread of disinformation.
Because, unlike the Pentagon Papers, these were selectively edited and released stolen and hacked materials. Ellsberg didn't hack the fucking Pentagon.
Government-funded censors frequently invoke the prevention of real-world harm to justify their demands for censorship.
But nobody does, remember, safety third.
Censors define harm far more expansively than the Supreme Court does. Increasingly, the censors say their goal is to restrict information that delegitimizes governmental, industrial, and news media organizations. That mandate is so sweeping that it could easily censor criticism from any part of the status quo, from elected officials to institutions to laws.
Okay, he doesn't say particularly what he's citing as far for that piece there, but the idea that the government, think about that for a second. Think of everything you hear on Twitter right fucking now, or during Trump for that fucking matter. Do you think that the people calling into question or insisting on the lack of legitimacy of the presidency or the federal government or any particular agency is being denied right now? Now, people will, during COVID, especially during the beginning of COVID, if you went against the CDC or the NIH, other human beings, other Americans would come out against you and people would tag you and talk about that shit. But you could still say your shit. If your opinion, they would jump on you about it. If you thought the CDC was full of shit, or you thought that people go, you're thinking wrong, fuck you, blah, blah, blah. But they wouldn't stop you from doing it. It was only when you were asserting ivermectin is a cure, blah, blah, blah. And then that's when you would get into trouble, because you were asserting things without evidence. And that assertion itself violated the terms of service medically of Twitter, not the United States. You can stand on a fucking corner anywhere and yell ivermectin is great and wait for the lawsuit when somebody dies from your advice.
Congress should immediately cut off funding to the censors and investigate their activities.
Okay, and by the way, included in the cutting off funding to the censors, it's the University of Washington in general.
It should mandate instant reporting of all conversations between social media executives, government employees, and government contractors concerning content moderation. And finally, Congress should limit the broad permission given.
Yeah, especially if bad guys in the, they should have to say it out in the open, so that if Republicans who are playing footsie with Russia or China, if they'll know if the, the federal, if FBI or people at Twitter are onto them. Yeah, that's why. That's what he wants. That's why, Elon Musk thinks this should happen. This is why Jim Jordan likes this. That's the piece of testimony Jim Jordan wants the most, because if the FBI or the DOJ is investigating a member of Congress or one of their staff, or any kind of an NGO related to their campaign or something like that, because they are actively working with a foreign power, Jim Jordan wants to know out in the open, so that they can, change their plan.
To social media platforms to censor, deplatform, and spread propaganda. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, ends with the word propaganda, like he said anything. This is really lame. I'm surprised. I'm expecting Taibbi to be a dick, but...
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement. Mr. Taibbi, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
For 5 whole minutes. And that guy over there is not happy about it. By the way, you're watching Hal Sparks Mega Worldwide. I'm here weekdays in the afternoon, 3 o'clock, except for Thursday when I'm on at 4 o'clock, because family FaceTime is wonderful. And then tomorrow on my morning show, which starts at 9 a.m. in the 10 o'clock hour, the second hour, 9 a.m. Pacific time, by the way, Malcolm Nance is going to be joining me. It's going to be very exciting. We're going to talk about his time in Ukraine and this dipshittery we're talking about right now, a little bit of that, and the misinfo war that is going on Earth right now. I think it's a valuable conversation. He has a lot of input on that. And then Saturday's my radio show, and of course tomorrow afternoon. Next week, just so you know, is my kids' spring break. So I'm going to do shows most of the week, but the morning show will be regular. The afternoon show might be shorter on some days. I won't do it on Tuesday because I have the jam at the Whiskey, and there might not be one on Wednesday depending on travel stuff. Just letting you know. But we will have the morning shows, and I will make up for it once spring break is over, because, I'm a working stiff, but I got to, I want to spend time with my kid if that's all right when he doesn't have school.